So you're all very, very welcome to this morning's AIB Business Leaders Live event. The theme this morning is holding strong, and I think that strength is there in Irish business at the moment, and it's a matter of how do we remain resilient, remain innovative, and remain agile. We have a fantastic keynote speaker coming up very shortly. He's a fantastic futurist, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say. We have two panel discussions coming up after that, where you're going to hear from business people from different sectors, different experiences, talking about how they're going to bring forward what they've learned from the last couple of years into the future and what they see as the big challenges and opportunities. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions. We'll have some roving mics, so at the end, the last few minutes of each session, I can go to yourself. So please do take the opportunity to put your hand up and ask a question of some of our fantastic panelists. But it gives me great pleasure to welcome first on stage this morning the Managing Director of Retail Banking at AIB to make some opening remarks. Will you please welcome Jim O'Keefe.
First of all, you're very welcome this morning. Delighted to have you here. It's great, and thanks for coming out in such numbers, in fairness to you all. From our perspective, we're really excited. We've had about 6 business leaders live remotely. So this is the first in-person one, so fantastic to see the numbers, and I know my colleagues around the room are delighted to have customers here. It's been a long journey. I was chatting to somebody earlier, Noel, one of the speakers, and we chatted early on in COVID, and that seems like an eternity ago. But and I really want to say thanks to you as customers for sticking with us and trusting us with your business over that period. And for the partners in the room as well, our professional partners. I was chatting to some of you this morning for your support during that period. And indeed, we have a lot of colleagues who have supported you through that period, and we're really grateful to them as well. COVID taught us a lot, and really today is about building on that. You know, our focus is around backing customers. Hopefully through COVID you saw that. And you saw, if you didn't experience it yourself in terms of your own business, that you saw the scale of support and backing that we gave to a wider audience. Today is really then around holding strong, and Andrew is going to chat. He's the main focus. Andrew is going to chat about holding strong. And really for businesses and for leaders in business, whether it's AIB or it's your SME business, really the challenges that we face, holding strong and change is powerful now for us. You know, we're hopefully seeing out COVID, but Brexit is alive and well in terms of what's going to happen there, the Ukraine war. But then all of those are diminished by the climate change agenda that we're going to face into. And I was chatting to one of our customers this morning who's really active in that space and making a lot of progress. But that is a massive item. So whatever about the change that we've experienced coming forward, holding strong in change is going to be important because there's a lot of it to come. So with that, thanks again for coming out this morning, and I'll hand you back to the tender loving care of Richard.
Well, as Jim mentioned there, our keynote speaker is Andrew Grill. He's a former global managing partner at IBM. He's also an expert when it comes to future-proofing businesses in order to stay resilient. He's launched and run technology companies in Europe and Australia, and he's worked for many, many large and small and medium-sized businesses. So he's got some great insights and real-world insights into how things happen on the ground and where things are going right now. So will you please welcome Andrew Grill.
I want to ask you all one simple question. Are you digitally curious? Now, normally offline or when we're online, we would raise a hand or something. Because we're at a Business Leaders Live, we're going to do this live. Can I get you all to stand up, please? I'm going to ask you 5 simple questions. The way this works is if your answer is yes, stay standing. If it's no, you have to sit down again. But if I say something you answer yes to, you can redeem yourself. So question 1, are you on LinkedIn? Stay standing if you are, sit down if you're not. Oh, I saw one sneaky person sit down there. Okay, we'll talk a bit further about why that's important in a moment. Question 2, who here has Googled themselves lately? Everyone's Googled themselves. Oh, a few non-Googlers, that's okay. We'll talk about why that's important. Question 3, who consumes all of your newspapers and magazines digitally? Any more standing up? A few up and down? Okay, good room here. This photograph's very interesting. It was taken in 2010 in Sydney, Australia. I just bought my first iPad and the guy next to me had some newspaper or something. This next question is really important. Who secures all of your social media channels with two-factor authentication? Okay, not bad, not bad. Room for improvement. Final question to see how digitally curious this room is. Who here has bought some Bitcoin? I've always got 3, don't let me down. I think I got about 6, fantastic. Give yourselves a round of applause. Those 5 things are really easy to do. And if you're not doing some of them, that's okay. I want you tonight, tomorrow, to investigate those sort of things. Because part of being resilient is having a digital-first mentality, about being digitally curious. You might wonder why some Australian who lives in London has been asked to come to Dublin to speak to a small and medium business audience. So let me very quickly give you some of my credentials. I've been doing this for a while. This is my first computer from 1980, the dear old Sinclair ZX80. Who remembers this? A few of you? Yeah, you probably even had one. And another question for you. Who here in the room was born after 1983? Got a few people? I've been online longer than you've been alive. Back in 1983, I was dialing up, remember this sound? To the internet, hoping it would connect, and dialing up things called bulletin boards. My father, who we'll talk about in a second, had to get a second phone line because I was always connected. Now, I know you're a predominantly small business audience. I come from a small business family. Here's my father, Ron, in 1970 in Adelaide, Australia, at his desk. Notice there's no PC, but do notice the calculator with a cord. And those 2 things up the top are called telephones, for those who aren't quite sure. So, I feel very comfortable here today, and hopefully I can give you some insights. And what I wanted to give you in the first sort of 7 minutes or so is just a taste of some of the things we'll be talking about with Richard and Jim a bit later on. Now, regardless of the pandemic or Brexit or whatever's going on, the one message I always give my audience is you need to disrupt yourselves or you'll be disrupted. And that's even more important now that we've come through the pandemic, Brexit, we've got all sorts of geopolitical issues. You need to constantly be disrupting yourself or someone else will do it for you. But disruption is an opportunity for change. And we're going to talk a lot about the lessons learned and how we can fundamentally change our businesses and not go back to the way that we were. Because the last 2 years have accelerated everything. But this is not the first pandemic where we had to work from home. Sir Isaac Newton, back in 1665, during the Great Plague of London, had to work from home. He had all his time on his hands, so he started talking and looking at his mathematical models that became calculus. He played with his prisms, they became optics, and he sat under a tree and an apple fell on his head, and the rest is history. He called this period his Annus Mirabilis. It was a magical year. So some good can come out of things like pandemics and all those other things going on. And today, I and the team would like to give you some actionable tips about what you can do. Because there's no mistaking, the world has changed forever, and especially in the B2B world. And I've been following some work from McKinsey that they've been doing since about April 2020. They've been constantly surveying a bunch of B2B buyers across multiple countries, multiple buying facilities, to see how their opinions have changed. The one thing that's come out is that everything is now omni-channel. That doesn't just mean telephone, e-commerce, chat, mobile. Customers expect that you can actually get to them in an omni-channel way. A couple of breakouts from their report. 2/3 of buyers prefer remote human interactions or digital self-service, and that won't change. Their survey they keep doing every few months actually goes up and up. More and more businesses are saying, we like this remote model. Gives us more flexibility. We don't have to travel. And 85% expect that hybrid sellers will be the most common sales role. So if you've got traditional sellers that are still a bit uncomfortable at these new ways of doing things, it's time to help them reskill to live in this omni-channel world. Now, for the last 30 years, I've had a mantra that to get digital, you need to be digital. The next slide I'm going to put up, you might want to pull out your phones because it's my most photographed slide. I call it the scary slide. Up on that screen are a bunch of words and jargon. Now, normally I'd say to my clients, in about 2 to 3 years, all of these things will impact your business. I think now it's more like 9 to 12 months. And you might say, Andrew, I don't know what all these things mean. That's okay. Tonight, this afternoon, go home and play Wikipedia bingo. Type these phrases into Wikipedia, understand what they mean and what they mean for your business. And if you don't want to do that, just ask a young person because they know what all these things mean. Data, or data, depending on where you come from, will become more and more important. And the notion of open data, you may have heard of the open banking regime throughout the EU. That was the EU's attempt to try and get banks to have their data to be open. But it won't stop with banks. We're going to start to see open insurance, open telco, open water. And the default will be if you can't communicate with other systems electronically through things called APIs or application programming interfaces, your competitors will. When we talk about the future of work, I like to think of it as the 3 Ps: people, place, and purpose. We'll talk a lot about people, the fact that now we can recruit from a global talent pool that don't have to be within transport distance of the office. Now, place is an interesting one. I'll just hold on that. But purpose, we'll talk about this a bit later on. Why do we go into the office? Why do our staff actually travel at all? I think place is where the best work gets done. So if you are working in a laboratory, where the best work gets done is in the laboratory. If you're a futurist keynote speaker preparing a talk for a bunch of small and medium people, then the hotel foyer is where the best work gets done. And I think that has changed because we can now do that. We're also going to talk about the notion of online versus in-person. Gone are the days where there were 2 people on the call and we kind of forgot that Shane was actually on the call. Is he still there? And now we have to think about how we actually accommodate those that are in a hybrid situation, but also people in the room. I've heard some of my colleagues saying they've gone back to the office, they don't have the setup, so they've got to go into individual conference rooms on Zoom calls or Teams calls to actually get work done. We'll talk about that a bit later on as well. One other thing that I know that Rich is going to talk about with me is your digital first impression. Now that we're basically online, now that there's a distributed workforce, now that you can actually buy things remotely, your first impression will be what they see when they look you up. So a bit more homework for you. Tonight, open up an incognito window or a private browsing window and type in your name or your company name and see what comes up. That's what people do about me. Here's a good example with LinkedIn. If you look at my LinkedIn page, this is the first thing that pops up. Where's your eye drawn? To the huge DHL logo. It means it provides some level of quality. Your eye is drawn to that big DHL logo because it's a sign of quality that if DHL or AIB have put me on stage, then I must have something worthwhile to say. But also look at my title. I don't just say what I do, I say how I can help you. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Collaboration will become very, very key. And we're going to talk about how you can actually collaborate, not just with each other, but with the community. I see in front of me 100 or so of a brand new community. Some of you know each other, some of you have met for the first time. How fortunate you are, you're all in this room together as a community. And I'm going to talk to you about how you can actually collaborate and have the community working together. And there's a way of doing that called working out loud, and I will talk about that as well. A couple of other things we're going to talk about is the notion of doing agile versus being agile, and there is a difference. And I want you to learn how to make better agile decisions. Back in March last year, we all went home. We had to. It was a legal requirement. So all the roadblocks of we have to wait to see how the pilot's going to work out, do we have the laptops, have we got a VPN, that went out the window. We had to make agile decisions. So what was stopping us from making those decisions for the last 4 years that allowed us to make it in March last year, or 2020, and how do we actually do that? And one final thing I want to look at is the notion of the 2 tribes that are in every room and every organization. First of all, you have the going digital. Many of you represented here today. You're senior leaders, you know how to get things done, but your digital skills are developing. Then there are the born digital. Their first toy was an iPhone. They live and breathe this stuff. The 2 tribes need each other. And with things like hackathons, and we'll talk about that, we can actually allow these 2 tribes to come together and actually help solve problems and become more resilient. Now, in that whirlwind tour, I've looked at a whole lot of things, and I want to give you some free resources. If you go to actionablefuturist.com/AIB, All the websites I've mentioned, all the books I've mentioned, and a bunch of other stuff is available because I want to give you some resources to help you stay resilient. So with that, I'll hand back over to Richard.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrew. It's great. I just wanted to ask you a couple of things. Just the exercise at the beginning was very interesting. I was thinking about whether the cryptocurrency people were actually the wealthiest people in the room, but or who knows. But digitally curious. How can we become more digitally curious if it's something that's potentially very valuable to us and to our business?
So the 5 things I looked at there were pretty simple. I looked at a range of things. I'll give you an example of how I became digitally curious. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was at a Christmas party in London, and I sat next to a gentleman, and I said, "What do you do?" He said, "I'm a Bitcoin expert." I said, "This is your lucky evening. I'm going to ask you all the questions I've been wanting to ask about this whole Bitcoin thing." And he said, "One thing you might not know is that the global transaction speed for Bitcoin is 7, that's 0.7 transactions a second." So I became more and more curious. Now, I'm not saying that Bitcoin, you shouldn't even look at it, but there were issues that I had never considered. And so all the things I put on that scary slide are things that you will come into touch with. You may have partners saying, "Do you have an API? Do you have open protocols? Do you have open data?" So part of it is just staying on what's going on. Listen to podcasts, listen to news feeds. Get the younger people in your organization to say, what are the hot topics? NFTs is something that we've heard about. Should we be worrying about those? What are they? So it's being hungry and leaning forward. It's almost about a level of diversity, of digital diversity. Do we have people on our boards, our committees, our teams that understand the scary slide and help challenge our thinking?
Okay. People talk a lot about resilience. They talk about resilience during COVID, how organizations responded and reacted to that. Why, at this point in time, is resilience so important as a concept and as a modus operandi for organizations?
We had a lucky escape over the last 2 years. We're back here again. We had a whole lot of challenges. Some of our businesses may have had some real turbulence. But we don't want to go through it again. And so, like I said before, we went home almost overnight because we had to. So what are the things that are stopping us? And so with resilience, you're basically saying, let's actually have the technology that's there, let's have the decision making, let's surround ourselves with the right thinking that we can make decisions very, very quickly. Because something will happen again. I'm from London. In a couple of weeks' time, there's a massive train strike. I've actually lost some business through it because there was going to be an event which is now cancelled. So what do? How do I actually come back from that? So we should expect more aftershocks. And if you have a resilience built up, the example would be I fly a lot and I've got used to turbulence. I don't like it, but I know that eventually we'll get through it because the pilots at the front are very skilled and it's a bit uncomfortable and we'll get through it. So the fact we've got through it, what are you doing now to build your resilience, your immunity to the next thing that's going to happen? Part of it's technology, part of it's culture, and part of it is in how you actually get work done.
From an organizational point of view, let's say I'm running an SME. I'm an entrepreneur, I run the business. I'm obsessed with being resilient and being able to keep going and being able to change in response to changed circumstances. How do I build that through the rest of my organization? It's no good if it's just me.
You've got to have people understand why you brought them along, and even if it wasn't resilience. I walked into a company in London a few months ago. They print business cards. They're called moo.com. It's a big room like this, and around the room there are literally hundreds of screens that show data on the business. How many people in the wait queue? What's the printing time? What are our financials? Everyone in the business can see the data. They've literally made the data real. Now, I'm not suggesting everyone puts screens around the room, but when the whole organization can see why you're doing it, this is about digital transformation or transformation anyway. They can see why the change is needed. Are you sharing your financials with the whole team? Maybe it's confidential, but if they saw, we had a bad month, here's the reason why, they would be more open to helping solve the problem. So I think exposing the workings of the business with data, whether it be making it visual or sharing information, is really, really important.
And
Jim, yes. I was going to say, from an AIB perspective, you've dealt with, as an organization, a lot of these, whether it's around digital, whether it's about resilience and responding to change quickly.
yes, so I think on the resilience piece, as leaders, making sure that people know that you have their backs is really important. Because you're going to get stuff wrong. during COVID, we got lots of things wrong as we came through, but you know, that phrase of a good batting average, I'm not exactly sure how the technicality of that, but you know, as a bank, we always make credit decisions right in the vast majority of cases, but we still get them wrong. So that backing of people to make sure that they know that you're there when you get things wrong will build resilience. And that's what we found through COVID. And the decision making as well, that they're able to move the decisions up fast. We're a very bureaucratic organization traditionally, so COVID, we had to peel all that back and make decision making much, much faster. So that meant that decisions that would normally be, you know, grind through a bureaucracy of items were suddenly coming right up to the top quickly. And we're probably exposing some of the failings that we had as an organization in terms of how complex and how we did things to us suddenly. We were looking at things and saying, not only are we going to make a decision about that, but we're going to change the way we do that. But I do think that people knowing that you have their backs in that piece is critical.
When you talk, Jim, about making decisions quickly because you had to, and that meant doing things differently and removing perhaps what would have been obstacles or perceived obstacles that are in place in particularly any large organization, how do you then bring that with you, let's say, for example, when that crisis is over, that you build it into how we do things as an organization from now on? We're going to keep all that good stuff.
Yeah, and with great difficulty, I would admit, Richard, being honest, because there is an ability for the organization to flip back to the previous piece. But I think having built the muscle, it's around empowering people, knowing what decisions you want to travel up and what decisions people should be able to go ahead and make. And that is just about making sure that you support people every day of the week and say, we don't need to see that. But we do want to see the customer-facing impacting items. We don't just want some, report that hides away what's happening from a customer perspective. Through COVID, the most important thing that we saw was what was happening on a daily basis for customers, and bringing that through is important. So it's not easy, because the organization naturally is pulling against you to go back to the structure and the safety of that bureaucracy. But I think as leaders, the most important thing is that we keep saying, we don't need to see all of those, and the ones we want to see, we'll move quickly with.
Andrew, that brings us to a kind of a crux or a difficult balancing act that many organizations have to face. They can see the benefits of digital. They've had to move to digital much more quickly during COVID, and they can see the benefits of that. But they also realize the importance of face-to-face and in-person communication. And balancing that, it can be difficult because it can't be just all about digital either.
Not at all. I'm not suggesting for a moment we go completely digital, but what McKinsey has shown is that B2B buyers are moving towards the fact they prefer that as the default. In fact, the survey showed that even $500,000 worth of goods are being bought online because people don't need to see that. So I think the challenge is, can you keep up the face-to-face, but can you now support it with a regular program of virtual visits and those sort of things? So the notion of omni-channel means it's no one channel over the other. It needs to be across the board. And the challenge, I think, is that we didn't go home and train people how to sell online or how to do that. We all know how to sell in person, and we do it really well. But I think we can actually enhance that because there are a generation of buyers coming through where to them, the born digital is default. So we need to be cognizant of both types there. But I really think, a good example is my mum in Adelaide. She never wanted to do online shopping. She was forced to, and now that's her default because it's easy. So I think we sometimes underestimate that can be a very easy thing to do. And the survey bore out that the reason people are moving away from always in person, it saves time. You've had a meeting where you've sat down the first 15 minutes of small talk. You've then realised that, I shouldn't really be here, and you've wasted 45 minutes. Whereas the Zoom call, you can go, thanks very much, goodbye.
And that's it. Jim, what's the experience within that of AIB as an organisation?
Yeah, colleague. I remember when I came into retail, a colleague of ours, when I was meeting some of the network, they said to me, Jim, try and make sure that you digitise the process, not the customer. And it was a great summary of the activity. And we've been very successful in, on our digital and our online. I won't dip into a sales mode, but on our online side, on our transaction banking, etc., we would believe we've led the way with great success. But when you look at those journeys where customers want to engage with you, and even if they've grown up digital, which would be like our first-time buyers on the mortgage side, there's still a requirement for the face-to-face. They still want to engage some way, whether even that's virtually now as we see. But then it's taking out the friction in the process. So we'll meet somebody in the branch or virtually or even in their home. And then when they want to move documents through or they get the required documents, they upload those. So they use the digital journey. They're able to check to see how it's working. And similarly, through COVID, on our SME side, on the credit side, we'd be less digital than that. But we had the government guarantee scheme. And when we looked at it, to make sure that it could work as quickly as possible, we deployed process digital to that, and that was phenomenal. It gave us, we talk about 60 to 65% of all that fund into AIB as a result of that simple decision of making the process digital. So I absolutely agree. I think it's a combination. It's the omni. We want to be in the community, working with people, but we need to make the process simpler and quicker and dare digitalize it, but we don't need to digitalize the experience in every case.
Andrew, does omni-channel mean ultimately more work, more resources, more things to look after? Is it actually tougher on an organization, whereas in reality, you expect it to be easier? It's all about making things easier.
I think it depends, and just to pick up on what Jim was saying as well, one thing I think that people realised during the pandemic was we couldn't get physical things signed. And I work with a lot of clients who require that for compliance. They then discovered these e-signing, there are a variety of them, and they said, well, that's okay, we'll allow that. So to your point as well, people that want to get the friction removed, part of it is moving paper around. So to your point about omni-channel, I actually think can enhance, because if you have removed the friction of having to come to sit down, have a cup of coffee, sign a piece of, I could have actually done an e-signature of that. I think also that you can actually measure more of that. For all of you there, you have more data, because you probably don't log every single sales interaction when there's an in-person, but when you're dealing with someone in a digital way, you can measure what they're doing. When do they come onto the website? How far do they go? Are they coming back? Those sort of things. The data becomes more important. So to your point, I think it becomes much easier because you actually know more about the customer because the data is telling you what you need to know.
Digital first impression. Are there typical mistakes that people make and organizations make in getting that first impression wrong, and what makes it work better? Who gets it right?
Well, like I said, the example I'd like you all to do is open up an incognito Google search engine or your favorite browser and type your name or your company's name in. What comes up is what your clients are seeing. Now, I've worked very hard on mine. There are actually 18 Andrew Grills around the world, and I own the first 5 pages of Google. I've worked very hard to do that because I want you to see the right thing. The challenge is, it isn't always about being on social media and pumping things out. It's what can they see? Can they find you? Try your competitor websites or try looking for your competitors and see what their digital first impressions, what are they doing right? Some of you here are probably from consulting firms where you're selling people. So if I type my name or Jim's name or Rich's name into a search engine, what I want to see is you have some authority. So it's very easy to understand what it is. It's a bit harder to keep it up because then people say, oh, I've got to be on LinkedIn all the time or posting tweets and those sort of things. If you've got something important to say, make sure that you put it out there.
Agility, Jim. AIB is a big organization. Normally we don't talk about large organizations being agile. We talk about smaller organizations. How has agility developed in AIB in response to the last couple of years, and how do you keep that?
Yeah, so I think on our first foray with agility, real into it, was around the digital processes. And that was not only just about making sure that we looked at it agile, that we would take it in incremental bites, like the mortgage journey we spoke about just there, but also we brought the customer into the loop. So we would, as part of our design for our mobile app, etc., we would have teams working with customers sitting in them, explaining what they wanted to see, because it's the born digital group advising us. So that has been hugely beneficial in that piece. And I think then organizationally, and like COVID was the standout example, we'd been wrestling with it as a bigger item for the organization for years. And suddenly you had 9,000 people had to go home and work at home. Obviously we had about 2,000 colleagues who had to work in the network, etc. as well. And then alongside that, we were having to put in payment breaks, okay, which was an absolute must for the economy, let alone the organization and customers. And through that, I think we really leveraged the muscle of Agile. You know, piece by piece. We didn't need to get it all done day one. You could do it incrementally. And that's really that's what I see Agile is that you don't say to yourself, oh, that's brilliant. We're going to have the best I would argue we have the best online app in the country, but if we didn't, you'd be saying, I'm going to have the best, and it's going to take me 3 years to do that project. In 3 years' time, the world is going to be so transformed, you're going to land somewhere which is the wrong place to go. It's the incremental piece, I think, in relation to it. And sometimes that's not easy for large organizations to take on. But I think COVID blew that myth and muscle out of the park.
Sure. Andrew, we're going to talk a little bit about future of work, remote working, hybrid models a little bit later on as well. But I just want to ask you about that. Do you see it as a real opportunity for organizations? Do you see it as a real challenge for organizations to try to get all of that balance right?
I think it'll oscillate. So we've all come back now, and you've read the stories where the Elon Musk of the world are saying you have to be in the office 4 days a week or you're not working. Like I said, place is where the best work gets done. And so I think what's happened is people have reassessed their purpose. So why was I traveling every day for a couple of hours, and that was on my time? And what's happened, certainly with my friends, is saying I had all this extra money because I wasn't spending it on travel. So we give people the flexibility. Is it 2 days in the office? Is it 3? I don't know the answer. I think it's going to oscillate. I think what will happen, though, is we'll find, as I said in my opening talk, we can actually now recruit beyond the radius of where the office is. We can get talent that's around the world. We can allow people to work in an asynchronous way. The problem with Zoom and team calls, they were just a synchronous in-person meeting. And when it stopped, you had to get ready for that. The best work gets done in an asynchronous way. Working in an agile way is you get work done when you get it done. The other challenge, and why I put the slide up of in-person versus in the room, people are now developing actual Zoom rooms where there's like these cameras here, point-to-talk camera. When that person speaks, the camera follows them rather than rushing into different rooms. Back in 1994, I was doing an engineering master's degree where we had rooms like that. It's totally possible to do. It's not that expensive. I think Logitech and Zoom have these things that can do that. Because otherwise, the people that are at home in the room of one are having a bad experience. So if we get the balance right, people will go, I actually want to be in the office a few days a week. I like being around people, but I also like having that flexibility. So I think what the pandemic has done, and I'd be interested in the AIB view, is where is the balance? Or in an agile way, do we actually give control to the people doing the work?
Jim, AIB.
And I think one of the things you mentioned about being, feeling a bit isolated or a second-class citizen in when you're zooming into a meeting, I think that has changed completely during COVID. Because, I remember having to dial into meetings, and I'm sure no matter what it was, and, you'd be dialing in, the meeting wouldn't start in time, nobody would let you know, so you weren't sure whether you dialed into the wrong location. At the end of the meeting, somebody'd finally say, actually, everybody's gone now, Jim, so we'll hang up. Whereas and that's really important because that enables the hybrid operating model. And so that's transformed now. The respect in terms of the person who's coming in remotely is transformed from our perspective. The concept of what's the right answer? Okay, is it 2 days a week? Is it 3 days a week, etc.? I'd be wrong to say that we have cracked it completely, and it's a fairly hot topic as an organisation as well. I think the one item from the pandemic that we had learned was that we didn't always need to know exactly what the answer was going to be. And I think we're all kind of saying, what is the actual right answer for working? If we stood back and actually said, well, actually, we're not 100% sure. Because we're not. So we need to trial a few items to see. We know the huge benefit of meeting face-to-face. You can see it this morning. It's just, and I feel it, but that might be me. And so therefore, I think we need to trial it for a little while before we land on it.
And you're operating at AIB a hybrid model. But what do you see as the toughest parts of that? What are the challenges around that? The things that you'd like to get right, or you might need to tweak, or what way is it going?
Yeah, so I think there's a very practical item when we're looking at 2 days in the office in terms of our hybrid piece. And it's making sure that the team that is working together are in at least for one of those days. Or otherwise, it's people coming into the office and going on to Zoom or Teams or whatever, and just feeling like, well, why didn't I stay at home and do this? Okay? So there's a practicality to just making sure that that piece works. For us as well, and I was chatting to somebody who was, again, with branches around the country in a different business altogether last week. We need to be careful as an organisation as well. We have our customer-facing colleagues who are coming in every day still in somewhat of a COVID environment, etc. And then we have our colleagues who can work remotely. There is a balance as well to that piece. There's a culture. There's always been a little bit of a head office and dem culture from a customer facing. We have to be very careful as an organisation that we don't create something additional there. So that's another challenge for us, because it would be fair to say when somebody who's in every day in the branch hears that we're struggling as to whether somebody should be in 2 days or 3 days to the office, they kind of say, first world problem, Jim. You know, so I think that balance as well. Sure. But certainly there's a few practicalities on the couple of days you're in to make sure that people feel they're getting value out of it.
Okay, great. Just want to throw it open to the floor. If anyone's got any questions, you want to put your hand up, you can ask Andrew or Jim. Any questions? We can get a mic to you if anyone has. No questions. So
just what you're thinking there, a good example is Apple. So Apple Retail have people on the floor, they close their shops. They looked at a hybrid model where some days you can actually do some of the work that you were doing from home, online processing, those sort of things, and some in the office. So even in a retail environment, you can actually augment the staff to allow them to have time in the back office as well as the front office. So I think people are doing that. And it's about being digitally curious. What are other companies doing? What are other industries doing? What can we learn from that? Part of today is to get your mind thinking about how your organization can actually be resilient by looking at some of the things that people are doing. There's no right answer. And what I'm almost on a weekly basis seeing is who's doing something different and is it working. And I go out into the community, I go and talk to people. I'll hopefully have a coffee with a few of you and ask what you're doing. I learn as well, and it is, I have to laugh because the agile methodology started with software development years ago. Google and Facebook have been doing it for years. And what you described about trying things, that's agile. Mm-hmm. And companies have been doing it for a long time. The pandemic forced us into an agile methodology where we're doing agile, not being agile. Being agile, and the challenge in an organization like yours is regulation, is how do you give authority and delegate that? And you can only do it so far in regulated organizations. If you're in the room and not regulated and have more freedom, why aren't you giving control to more of the people in the organization? Because you trust them. If they show and they can be trusted, and you've got the data to show the work's being done, you've then got a very, very agile organization and you build resilience. So the answer's in the room. Another quick example. Many of you would use Teams and Zoom and Slack. You can actually set up those collaboration tools to have all of you on it. You could actually set up a Slack channel or a Teams channel with this group in it. And there's always someone in the room or in the community who has the answer. When I was at IBM, I ran a collaboration practice. I had 400,000 people that I could literally say, who knows about this on the internal social network? You've now got a community. So ask the room. I tell all my audiences, why not set up a community Slack, Teams, Yammer chat channel to solve problems? And imagine you're working away late at night and someone's got the answer. You have an amazing opportunity just in this very room.
Okay, great. Do you have any questions so far? One final question, it relates to hybrid and remote working and the future as well. I interviewed a guy, an author of a book on the radio show last week, who talked about making your own luck and serendipity. And he was of the view that many of the great things, whether it's in our personal lives, in our social lives, or in business, happen through circumstance. And one of the things that concerned him was that with remote working, you've less opportunity to have that bump into somebody, that casual conversation, whether it's at the train stop, on the train, over a cup of coffee, the water cooler, whatever it is. Is there a real challenge there for organizations, do you think?
Yeah, that's the one thing I've seen that people are missing, because I like that water cooler moment. But you can manufacture those. I've got friends that work across different segments, and I ask them all the time what they're doing in big organizations. By saying, look, we're going to be in the office Tuesday, Thursday, it doesn't force serendipity, but at least you're there. And if you then have drinks afterwards or some sort of social thing, people might be drawn to do that. Here's the thing though, when they're in the office, give them less workload. Don't have them on Zoom calls all the time. Have time in the office, the agile time, where you actually allow that to happen. So I think part of it is,
he talked about recreating the smoking room without the cigarettes.
But allow people when they're in the office.
Just for my colleagues in the room, Andrew, that idea of doing less when you're in the office, we might take that away and see how we work that out.
But if you've just come into the office to do what you're always doing, when do you have those serendipitous moments? So I think there's a balance, because you want people. It's funny, I had a law firm, he said they're all coming back out of that, and they're all chatting. It's not billable time. But by them chatting, they're actually doing serendipitous work. Okay. So I think there's a balance there.
No, and to be fair, I think you're absolutely right. Because all the practical reasons as to why people would work from home 5 days a week are very clear. It was much more difficult even as leaders when we were discussing, well, actually, we need to look at encouraging people back for a couple of days a week. And part of it was that engagement. And as people are coming back, and I'm not saying it's 100%, but as people are coming back, they're coming up with the water cooler moment. And they're saying, actually, it is great being at home because I have all the practical reasons. But the difference was I bumped into Richard today and I never knew that Richard knows about X, Y, or Z. Yeah. Or indeed, the other side of it is somebody's having a difficult old day, they go down for a cup of coffee and they meet Andrew, who's also having a difficult day, or maybe is able to help them. I think that support piece as well is important. So
okay, great.
We'll definitely look at easing the workload for those.
Well, not easing the workload, but let's not do the same thing. If I come in and sit on a Zoom call, to your point, why couldn't I do it at home?
Yeah.
Allow me thinking time. I mean, question you may have asked is, how do you innovate or how do you create these new opportunities? You have to plan some time to think. When do you do that? And as a small business, you're always on, so when have you got time to think?
Okay. Well, on that note of thinking and serendipity, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you very much, Jim O'Keefe and Andrew Grill. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
We actually, hold on one sec, we have a question. We do have a question at the back there. Yep.
Andrew, listen, thank you so much. Some really great insight, and Jim also. Look, a quick question for myself. Obviously, we're dealing with massive recruitment challenges across all sectors. And at the same time, for many sectors, we're trying to really embed a hybrid model. What do you see as the greater challenges for companies in dealing with those twin challenges, but obviously trying to support and embed a company culture, particularly with new staff working in a hybrid model?
Understand their purpose. The new people you're recruiting, what is their purpose in life? They've been through that. Do they like commuting all the time? Probably not. So if you understand what drives them to come to work, and can you energize that and harness that? And it may be that they have a slightly different job than you'd engineered. And the hybrid model also allows you to have more of a purpose. Everyone here will say they enjoyed some of the time with their family, maybe some not, but there were other things that you could do. And if only we had that flexibility. So I would go back to the 3 Ps and the passion. What drives these people to want to come and work for you? And in a hybrid way, what are they going to see? What will the experience be like?
I mean, the only thing I'd add is that for ourselves, distributing centres of excellence across the country is a real focus for us at the moment, because that allows us to tap into talent at a local level. Whether people just want to come into Limerick, Cork, or I won't name all the cities for a period. So we see that local hub as a really big opportunity for us to tap into talent as well and give people, rather than dragging them all up to Dublin for the event. So that's something that has changed as well for us through COVID.
Okay, guys, thank you very much. Well, we're going to move on to our first panel discussion, and I'm delighted to welcome Birgitte Hayden-Curtin, owner-manager of Burren Smokehouse, Noel Anderson, who's managing director at the Bridge 1859, the Lemon and Duke, and the Black Rock, and he's also former chair of the Licensed Vintners Association, and Catherine Moroney, head of business banking market at AIB. You're all very welcome, guys. Thank you. Let me start with you first, Birgitte. Burren Smokehouse, many people will be familiar with the brand, I'm sure, and the business. Just tell me a bit about the business and your story over the last couple of years and where you're at now. What changed and where you're at now?
Well, I suppose we started 33 years ago with a certain amount of inspiration from my home country. So I come from the east coast of Sweden, grew up on a self-sufficient farm. Everything we ate, we foraged, fished, or grew around us. We were completely self-sufficient, using our own materials around us, hugely sustainably living. So when I came to the west coast of Ireland, in the little village called Listonvarna, it was like being in the middle of nowhere, but actually in the center of the universe, because of the opportunity of cliffs and moor beside us. So with that opportunity, we have built a business with tourism, and food tourism was really the part of our business model. And that gave us opportunity to meet actually international and global visitors over the 33 years that we operated. But that, of course, changed a bit the last 3 years, and we had to pivot around that. Being in this, amazing region called the Burren, and the amazing landscape that we're in. Initially, when we started up in 1989, we were the only ones that actually brought people into our premises to showcase and educate about how we smoke salmon, where does the salmon comes from, because we're using 100% Irish salmon because it's part of our sustainability goals, to use from what is around us. Now we have a community of businesses that work on the same premises, and we together worked very much together during the pandemic to stay on top of the agenda as a destination to visit, and the support we got from the Irish community was amazing.
So what you found particularly was the support that you got from the wider community during the challenges, but then you also had to look at the mechanics of the business itself, and how has the business changed now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we would have several channels of opportunities. So number one would be tourism, food production, and we started just as an experience in people visiting, and then we grew our retail business. So we do supply retail in Ireland and outside Ireland, a certain amount of export, and then private mail order. We've been operating for the 33 years, really. And then we also did food service. So food service and the tourism side fell away completely for a period of time. And we had to rely on, and we were very lucky that we had the expertise we had in international shipping and also within shipping within Ireland. And we were discovered the food gifts, either people giving gifts themselves, using corporate gifts, or indeed sending to people all around Ireland and also internationally. And that really saved us. It made up for a lot of the tourism, not fully, but for the tourism that we didn't have. And we worked on a very collaborative basis. So we created something called the Burren Basket, as simple as that. It was just the kind of what are we going to do? We need to help ourselves because the food service was completely gone. You're talking about 2020, we started with the Burren Basket. As simple as that, a small little idea that we came up with, and our cheese producers had, built up stock for Easter was coming up. They had huge amounts of stocks, and you can't it doesn't have a huge shelf life. So we said, okay, we'll do a Burren Basket with some St. Ola goat cheese, some Burren Gold cheese, other produce from the area. We called it the Burren Basket.
And that took off, really.
And that took off, and we kind of said, sure, we'll sell a few, we'll see how it goes for Easter. It went very well, and we had to keep bringing more supplies in, and luckily enough, again, everybody were living very close to us, so we could drive down and get new produce, and that kind of kept us going. Christmas, and people got this gift, sent it as hope get well, sure. Or okay. Happy birthday, sorry I can't be there with you, to grannies and granddads and sisters and brothers, and people got the gift and they said, oh my God, this is a great gift, I'd love to send that to somebody else. So it really snowballed, and it was a huge success. Something
you can take with you. Noel, in relation to yourself, just tell us a bit about the business, the bars, the last 2 years and where you're at now.
Very fast version is I dropped out of college when I was 17, became an apprentice barman in the Blue Haven in Rathfarnham, where I worked my way up through the trade. Took my first lease of a pub when I was 21, which I describe as Harvard, Yale and Oxford all put together. Didn't work out for various reasons. Then I was 25, went group manager for a chain of pubs. I took another lease of a pub in town called the Grafton Lounge, which is now Lemon and Duke. Linked up with some rugby guys, and we bought the Bridge 1859 in Balls Bridge. Then we we bought the restaurant next door to it. And then we've just recently purchased a pub in Blackrock, which will hopefully be open in August. And found myself the chair of the Licensed Fitness Association in the biggest crisis in the hospitality industry in the world. So I've had an interesting few years.
What's it like being in business with 4 very well-known rugby players?
They all have their own different traits, But look, it's great. It adds a bit of sprinkle, and it's always good when they're around, and brings different variations. They have different.
Do they gang up on you at all, or
no?
Do you try and divide and conquer? You're talking
about
all they are, the 2 Carneys, the 2 brothers.
2 Carneys, Sean O'Brien and Jamie. Yeah. So look, it's gone very well. So we've gone back in together, and none of us had to put any money down for Blackrock, which is always a good sign. So they're happy to roll again.
When it comes to challenges and the COVID period, the business that you're in, I think many people would have a very clear picture of just how difficult and challenging that was.
Yeah.
But if you look at how you responded to that challenge and what you can learn from now and on into the future from that.
Sure, it was a real shock at the time. I think shock for everybody, but particularly in our business, because like that's where we were closed down effectively. So I remember my dad always through life when we were growing up, he said always have a few bob in a rainy day fund, and that really helped us because, you know, we had some money sitting on a deposit account, so it made us, we were able to think a little clearer. I certainly was. I also ended up in a pretty high-profile court case against FBD. We took Pacific Insurance out against it, and they reneged. And unfortunately, I had to sue them, and we won. So it helped having some money there. In terms of the businesses, you know, after the shock, you were like, what we wanted to do, and it was one of the main things that has benefited us in the end, saying was keeping our staff working. So we created a window on the bridge, and we started selling burgers and falafels, and you know, we were also doing takeaway cocktails. And you know, I was laughing earlier on. We were doing takeaway pints out the window, and the licensing officer came along and said, "No, you have to have a cap on that, or it has to be sealed." So we were selling bottles of cocktails at the time. So one of the guys got a bottle and filled it and put a cap on it. And
You just put a pint in the bottle.
Put the pint in the bottle, and look, it was a bit odd, but we ended up selling thousands of them. So like, it was about like survival. What does it take to survive? So we were able to keep 5 or 6 core people working. So when we opened the bridge on the back end, we had like the stability of the team there. And in terms of town, I'm sure people were probably sick of seeing me on the telly, and I was sick of seeing myself on it, but I was able to, every interview I did, I was like, yeah, sure, no problems, I'll stand outside Lemon and Duke. I stood outside the bridge. So I kept our brand alive all throughout the pandemic. So when we came out the other side, people were like, oh, Lemon and Duke, yeah, Lemon and Duke. So in the back of their mind, it was there, the bridge was there.
Yeah.
So that really worked for us as well.
Okay. Brigitte, just to you, what are the biggest challenges for your business now?
Well, I suppose we're looking at packaging costs, distribution costs, energy costs. We have a very good team. I did lose a few key positions over the last 2 years, actually the last year, and it took a good while to fulfill. We have now fulfilled that. For us, also on the West Coast, accommodation is a huge issue, and people moving over. So again, looking at somebody working remotely can work, you know, to a certain extent, but actually we need people on premises. So yeah, staffing.
So rising
energy
costs, staffing, and accommodation is one where you are. And Noel, what about you? What are the big challenges right
I'd
now?
say very similar. So in terms of like a lot of people talk about energy costs for households and stuff, but like we use a company called We Can Save You Money, and he rang me the other day, and we were just coming out of contract with our energy provider, and he's sitting down. Our energy, our electricity has gone up by 80%, our gas has gone up by 200% because we've come out of contract, and that's the best offer. So just to equate that into financial terms, the bridge alone is going to have to pay an extra $35,000 a year just on energy. It's probably about $50,000 in Lemon and Duke. And then obviously staffing is a huge issue when losing people in our trade. So the hospitality industry lost a third of the people in hospitality. We lost about 10 to 15%. And it's getting those sort of people back and replacing them is a huge challenge.
Okay. Catherine, listening to Brigitte there and Noel, how does that tally with what you're hearing from business customers in the bank and across different sectors?
It's very typical. I think all sectors really, they vary in intensity of the issues and the impact of the issues, but some of the things that were spoken about there, the challenges, just to give you a few examples, the labour piece in particular. I mean, we all know about the supply chain and the increase in costs, energy in particular, but a customer I was speaking to earlier in the week, you'd all know them, really good hotel chain, and they were telling me that they've actually closed 30% of their beds. Now, you wouldn't know that if you rang them, they would say the rooms were full. But actually, they've 30% of their beds closed because they can't get the general managers. So they have the junior staff, no problem. All the students have just come out of college, but they can't oversee it. And funny enough, you were talking about partnerships. This piece is proprietary, so we're going to be helping them with what they're doing, but they're working with others in their community now to try and solve for that in a collaborative way. Now they have to work through how that works. The lawyers will be delighted contractually, and you know where value passes and sharing. Another example in terms of a challenge in the supply chain, a really good motor business, motor parts, north and south. So they've got the Brexit issues, don't know what's going to happen with protocol. They've supply chain issues. They have had to increase their stock fourfold and that was before costs went up. So we were helping them with stocking finance. But now, not only have they to hold 4 times the stock, but the price of that is escalating really rapidly. They've started to share, and they're using a lot of data as well to manage this with others. They've started to share logistics, pallets, and their warehousing, and they're even thinking about should they co-invest in technology, which may need a new co-structure or whatever. So I think the other thing, it was spoken about on the first panel, which is really important in terms of flipping that, is that we have to start thinking that collaboration, that agility isn't just within your business. And there are going to be new ways of doing that, I think, out there with other businesses, because we're going to have to. And the other thing I really want to say is that in terms of the future and some of the resolutions to that, there's massive opportunity. There's 22 billion to be spent in Ireland alone in the near term, 22 billion on the sustainability agenda, and that's backed by mandatory legislation, and it will affect all sectors.
And for you, Birgitte, in particular, I would imagine that sustainability is a big part of your story, it's part of your brand, it's part of the location. And if you get that right, then that is an opportunity, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I mean, we have 2 certifications, Origin Green, which is run by Board BIA, and with Origin Green, we measure our water waste and energy usage. And we have another sustainability brand, which is called the Burren Code of Practice, which we do with the Burren Ecotourism Network that we have collaborated with. And both of these are really important to us. And it's a story we can tell for people coming to visit us, to say, you know, international visitors, chauffeur-driven, self-drive, people that really care about where they do come to visit. And it mightn't be as price sensitive, but they care about how are these businesses operating and are they sustainable. So that is a huge issue for us. And we have we have a new visitor center in the smokehouse that opened by Sabina Higgins in 2019, October 2019, so we didn't actually get to use it. But in there, we talk about, you know, the wild salmon, the organic salmon, because we use 100% Irish produce, and we use the Irish organic salmon. It's organic again. It's a sustainability brand as well in
and
itself.
Getting that message out that it becomes part and parcel of the brand.
We also talk about the SDGs, which is, you know, something that all the secondary school students coming in, they see this wheel of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, that was created in UN 2015, and they say, oh, we know all about that. And for you know, maybe the older generation, something to bring in to life. And, you know, again, sustainably produced food, that is something that we are very much involved in, but also it's that messaging through social media, through our visitor center, and to people to get something. It's sustainable for your own body. It's healthy food. It's extremely healthy food. It's superfood, small batch production, along with other small batch production in the Burren. And that's something that we need to really shout about, because there's an opportunity for us.
And Noel, opportunity for you. You've just bought another pub, the Black Rock.
Yeah.
You clearly see the opportunity there.
Yeah, well hopefully we're in deep shit. But we see opportunities in the suburbs, because where we have a pub in town, we have a pub in Ballsbridge and pub in Blackrock. One of the issues is a lot of people struggle to get a taxi into town now, and there's the whole support local and stuff like that. So we saw a bit of a shift towards local suburban pubs, and we just think there's an opportunity in Blackrock in general. I think our brand would be a better fit than a Witherspoon's brand, hopefully. So we genuinely do. But I think the next couple of years could be a bit funny. But I think, you know, where you offer a good service, we don't get it right all the time, we would first admit that, but we certainly try. So if you offer really good food, really good service, in a nice environment that people feel safe in, I think they come back. Like, the hospitality business is quite a simple business. You do the basic things really well, consistently, and people will come back. And we actively work heavily on that. And then the use of technology through Res Diary, a lot of people are booking. The people have got used to booking. So so people can go on now on our website, on our widget, and book the table they want to sit in. So we've added that facility on, which strips out loads of emails and stuff like that. So my reservations team can focus on bigger stuff. And to what the guys were talking about earlier on, in terms of, like, we see people working from home as a real threat to our industry. But where I see the opportunity is this referred to the the smoking room without the cigarettes. That's the pub. That's the pub or a restaurant. That's the pub for lunch, catching up with your colleagues that you haven't seen. We see
And then that's
opportunity.
as much about location, and you talked about the suburbs, and there's an opportunity there.
So if they do come into town, we see people wanting to have their team socialise together. Otherwise, they'll completely disconnect. So we think there's opportunity there.
Catherine, from the bank's point of view, what part can the bank play in relation to helping businesses with these challenges and opportunities?
Yeah, and I mean, that's our role, to facilitate businesses. That's our purpose. So there's a lot we can do. I think if we take a forward look, even listening to Noel there talking about what is a local business, support it globally. I mean, Diageo no doubt are in there with you, supplying you. You talked about tech and all that has to go with that, and yet the footprint is local. And listening to Jim and Andrew earlier about that agility and about humans connect for wisdom. And then I think you use technology for connection and knowledge, but that spark of wisdom and creativity. And our role in that, I mean, we really saw over the last 2 years. There's people here from the likes of Vintners that Noel has, and we worked with them through that in focus groups. Incredible. Virtually some of them, all different sectors, sharing ideas. And what we're doing is we're translating. I mean, we're already on the journey of supporting customers. I've mentioned a few things there, like the asset finance. And I think the really important thing is, if you look at where we're going to play into this into the future, I'm going to mention it again, if you don't mind, at the risk of repeating myself, that 22 billion that has to be spent here, and everybody will think, oh, that's energy. We've got one of the strongest wind power potentials. We could be net exporters. Now look what net exporters of energy do to their balance of payments. But it's not just energy that has to be built, distributed. It has to be used. There are trades, engineers, manufacturing, retail. They're all going to play into that. We've been on the sustainability journey ourselves for 7 years. So our role now, we're really clear, is to work with our customers in that transition. We have I'll just give you maybe 2 examples. We have a 10 billion climate action fund, and there's really rigorous metrics. I see a super data person right at the back of the room there on a high stool, Geraldine Magnier, who works with us, but using data as well as working really hard in this space, we're able to say, okay, there's certain mortgages that we know are green. That benefit is passed back through that climate action fund, because behind us there's funds giving us better pricing, which we're then able to pass back. We're already doing that. We've more to do here. We're not finished. I mean, we're still working through this, but we've mortgages in there. We've electric vehicles through a partnership we're doing with Nifty. We have infrastructure projects for wind energy and renewable, and we're moving down into the different size. Retrofit is a huge part. If you think about retrofit for houses, retrofit for businesses, that's a national footprint of change. And that is not going to just affect trades and energy. There's going to be consultancy in that. There's going to be supports locally in the community around that. And our role is to facilitate all that, finance it, and provide the advice and the sectoral expertise.
And that's there to tap into. Any questions from the floor at this point? Anyone want to ask a question of our panel? No, you're all just thinking about it there. Okay, just while you're thinking about it, Birgitta, having come through the last couple of years, the business is in the position it's in now. If you'd one piece of advice for someone in the room who's running a business, involved in a small or medium-sized business, one piece of advice from you about coming through those challenges and how you got through them, what you've learned from it.
Yeah, I suppose always stay positive and don't really spend a lot of thinking time and see opportunities. And you just don't know which one it is that is going to land. But I think you can kind of navigate through and have a hunch. This is really the way to go. And I think that working with the team, talking to the team together, seeing these opportunities, and also broaden the network. I mean, the networks have been always hugely important for me, whether it was the Burn Equators network, so we were 68 businesses working together. We would have, through the pandemic, had a weekly call, Zoom call, doing a marketing meeting, and the things that you can pick up from them or the trends that is happening in the area, that would have given me opportunities to think of new, or somebody else's, like actually, that situation of our local, another food producer that has huge difficulties actually brought me to to help them, to enable them, brought me to another opportunity. So it just, you don't know where it's coming. But I mean, I'm in this situation right now where I'm putting on my thinking cap, looking in the environment and saying, where can I go now? Where are the opportunities? You kind of have to have that wide vision.
You have to be open to it.
Open to it, and I think take time out. Okay. And also, I mean, I think there's that energy piece is hugely important. And I think that you really need to stay within, there's so much happening. There's such quick, speedily changes here. And there are people that can see opportunities. Sure. And they're coming up with solutions, and it's just to hit the right solutions for you, to look out for them, whether it is through IT or whether it is like energy sources, and prices will come down when they have more. I mean, I was talking about biodigesters yesterday with my ecotourism community, and also solar panels. And that is a very rapid changing environment with investments that can actually, if you can get your investment return in 3 years.
So if people are thinking sustainability
and I think
into the future,
energy is very much somewhere where I need to be.
Noel, one of the things that strikes me, you mentioned about, I was going to ask you about, things that you've learned from it, from the last couple of years and what you're bringing into the future. One of the things that I find extraordinary is guys in your business whose backs were to the wall during COVID because it was so affected, somehow you found the time or took the time to deal with the stress of that and to take the court case that you took against the insurer, which you ended up winning and which benefited an awful lot of publicans in the sector. How did you manage to do all that?
There was 4 cans of Heineken on a Monday. There was 8 on a Friday, 12 on a Saturday. No, it was very, very stressful. But I think when I was in the role as chair of the Licensed Fitness Association, you kind of had to say, this is my chance to help as many people as I could. So there was kind of 2 sides. So we had a huge engagement with government, and you could go on about it, but the supports were key. So that was, once we protected our business as best we could, the banks were really, really good. They backed off, they gave us the time we needed, and the insurance case was huge. But not panicking, having a bit of money, and protecting our staff. And like the big thing that I would take home from there was that you saw the pandemonium in the airport a week ago because they didn't protect the staff, the good staff that they had. They let them all go. Mm-hmm. So protect the really good workers that you have, surround yourself with good people, look after them, and try and have as many good people around you when you're under pressure, because that helps. And don't panic and take insurance out against it. Yeah.
and read the small print. Yeah. Thank you very much, guys. I'm afraid I'm conscious of time. I'm going to have to wrap it up to Birgitta, to Noel, and to Catherine. Thank you very much,
Thank
guys.
you.
Yep. Now, I want to welcome the panelists for our third session, and will you please welcome Don Harrington, who's Director of Corporate Finance with Goodbody, and Denise Cullen of Enterprise Solutions. Don, I want to talk to you a little bit about, I want you to be the sort of Jerry Murphy in Med-Air and looking at the weather forecasts. And we don't want what's going to happen in the next 24 hours. Businesses out there are wondering what's happening over the next 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months. Just how uncertain are times out there now?
Yeah, the 12 months rainfall radar. Well, we're entering a period of, it could be stagflation, reduced growth, increased interest rates, increased inflation. So we're all feeling that now with, we're paying more for utility bills, our mortgages are going to increase. So all of those things are going to hit home. And the OECD brought out its latest forecast yesterday, and so they've reduced their forecast for global growth from 4.5% to 3%. In Ireland, we still have the benefit of the multinational input into that, so 4.8% in terms of growth this year, about 1.6% next year. So that helps. It doesn't help a lot of people in this room. I think there's always been a little bit of a disconnect between our globalized part of our economy and our national economy, so there will be that impact. I think the EU and North America, Their growth rates this year are going to be around 2.6, 2.7%, about 2% next year. China's a little bit higher, 4.5 to 5%. But President Xi, he is overseeing, he's the first leader in 5 decades to oversee growth levels which will be below that of the US. So that's a big change. And then inflation clearly is the big spectre, and that started as we came out of the pandemic. The spends by European governments, allowing governments to borrow more to support, social security benefits, healthcare spend, and related infrastructure. So that was a net positive and needed, but it's created an inflationary impact. And as we all started to travel again, oil costs were rising, and then the Russia-Ukraine impact. They're a big global commodity supplier. They're 30% of the wheat market, 20% of corn, mineral fertilizers, and also natural gas, and about 11% of oil.
Okay.
So that's all pushing through the economy. And then the other, Central Europe is going to feel that a lot more. We're going to have inflation rates of 6 to 7% at peak probably this year. UK maybe 8 to 9%. Central, if you took Slovakia, Poland, Hungary, but the Baltic states in particular, you're going to see rates anywhere from 10 to 16%. And Lithuania, where one of our clients has a manufacturing facility, last December, the forecast for their inflation rate was 3.2% this year. It's going to be close to 16%.
Which is a real change, a real
that's
shock.
a big change.
If you look at the Irish economy coming out of COVID, to a certain extent coming through it at the beginning of this year, there was a lot of momentum in Irish business because we were kind of saying to ourselves, we're actually coming out of this a lot better than we thought we might. We're in a reasonably strong position. Our balance sheet is better than we thought it would be. So businesses budgeted accordingly for this year. And are they now having to look at that and, well, how will that play out this year? Or are they sort of saying, look, we're committed to what we're doing. We're still seeing momentum. We're still moving at a certain speed, and it's really next year is a bit more uncertain.
Yeah, I think the balance sheets generally, personal balance sheets and corporate balance sheets entered this period probably as strong as they could be. Like household savings were about 900 billion coming out of the pandemic across Europe, 2.7 trillion in the US. Corporate balance sheets are, compared to the financial crisis, their balance sheets are quite strong. So people would be discerning about it. Like Noel talked about having a rainy day fund, so that's important. So, maintaining that balance sheet discipline, but still being prepared to invest. So I think people, as one client said to me, I think 22 will look after itself. They've had that tailwind to kind of support them coming into late 21, the first half of the year. The second half of the year, a little bit more uncertain. And then 23, it's kind of, well, how are all those kind of inflationary costs going to kick up? And investors look at it and say, well, what's profitability going to look like? What's the right level? Like inflation has to be shared in an economy. Consumers, manufacturers, distributors, suppliers. If you get that balance wrong, you have trouble. If you get the flow through right, then it'll work.
China, you mentioned about President Xi there, and I saw, I think it was this morning in the Financial Times, that they're going to stick with this zero COVID policy. Yeah. And as long as they stick with the zero COVID policy, we're likely to see temporary lockdowns in China on an on-off basis for a while, and some supply chains there. What does that mean for Irish businesses? Are there opportunities internationally from something like that?
Yeah, there are always opportunities. Just like that whole approach, and I'll come back to the opportunity point. The whole approach by China, what President Xi is doing, they have form here. In the 50s, Mao tried to eradicate mice and rats and sparrows and mosquitoes. In the 80s, Deng Xiaoping brought in the one-child policy. So this whole approach, so they do big things. And so this whole institutionalized zero COVID policy has a big impact. Like a practical implication of that was the GE Healthcare had a plant that was shut in Shanghai from the 27th of March, and they supply the CT scanners in a hospital. They need a composite, a dye that's used to look at the scans. And these scans are used to look at heart blockages, or do you have a stroke, or is there a dangerous clot in your lung? So doctors have had to triage those scans and push them out a couple of months because not enough scan available. We also make GE in Ireland makes the same composite dyes. That's led to an increase in production required. They can only do so much, but it has led to an increase in production in Ireland. And flying that to North America, it usually goes by ship lower cost for that. But so there are opportunities always coming out of the sort of supply chain dislocation, and that whole supply chain theme is a constant. That's going to take a few years to work out as people try and nearshore things to protect supply.
Well, Denise Cullen, talking about opportunities from supply chain shifts and from changes that are going on, your business, Enterprise Solutions, just tell us a little bit about it and how things have changed and you've benefited from what has been, upheaval over the last couple of years.
Yeah, so Enterprise Solutions is an IT company, and basically what we do is we partner with Citrix and Microsoft, and we take the best of those technologies and we work with our customers to create what they want, to create solutions for them for their particular bespoke business, whatever works for them.
If you look at COVID, for example, we suddenly saw so many businesses had to introduce remote working. So what happens to the IT?
Yeah, and I suppose for us, because we're strategic players in the market, COVID gave us a bit of a shake. We had a number of projects put on hold. We had customers that are MSPs that just didn't have the budgets to help them. So you found yourself leveraging the skills of the guys to help our own customers to get up and prepare, work from home. And I suppose from the opportunities for us really is circling back around now, because now we're kind of saying to people, we all got mobile, we were all able to work from home, we all had the technology that enabled us to do that, and now we're at the point that we're saying you have to circle back around and look, do due diligence on your networks, do due diligence on what your companies are doing to ensure that you are secure and that you're able to protect your own data when you have your data, but then when you have all your employees working from home, that they're able to access your data securely, and that is something that we're concerned in the industry isn't actually happening.
And you're an Irish company. Obviously,
Yes.
You're very plugged into multinationals. One of the challenges we've had in Ireland over the years, we've had all these multinationals here, but maybe there weren't as many opportunities for smaller Irish companies to feed into them. Do you think, is that something that's changing and that presents opportunities?
I suppose that's open for discussion all the time. I suppose for us, the multinational companies that have come in, we're Platinum Citrix partners, so we're really big in that space, and that's where our level of expertise are. So a lot of our team are really the best that there are in this technology. So for us, what's happened, and the benefit of it is that the multinational companies come in. Citrix is a huge player to enable them to do their business across, and then they're asking them to look locally for expertise to help them to work in their own environments, so that we can do the due diligence and make sure that they're optimizing everything to enable their staff to work from home. So from our point of view, it's a benefit. It's about trying to get the opportunity to get in to see these guys, to say, even if you have another incumbent and you're working with an IT company, that's great. We're not asking to walk and think. We're saying this is our expertise. We're Citrix. We can, help you optimize your Citrix and your Microsoft together, and we can help you build the solution that you need. And I suppose optimize the whole rest of your IT system. It's like about going in to do due diligence for a health check. It's not necessarily about going in to take over the whole. Naturally, with 22 employees, I can't take over the whole multinational support system, but it's about leveraging just the expertise that we have.
But if they're increasingly open to saying, for a company like yours, you can do this that other people cannot do. We want to do that.
It's definitely improving. It's definitely for them.
And what about hybrid working? We've seen remote working. A lot of businesses now are talking about AIB and others, looking at doing the hybrid model. What does that mean for the IT systems? So if there was a fundamental change a few years down the road, and hybrid was it was all about coming back to the office, are the changes the companies are making now easily reversed, or what way are they doing that?
It doesn't work like that. So basically what actually happens is that cloud-first solutions is the way that we're going. So as a country, where really everything's going. So once they're going to the cloud, we can leverage off the different types of technology. And once we make those decisions, lock down, have the security in place, then it really doesn't matter where they're working. So whether they're working at home or they're working inside, they're working in an office space, it doesn't matter. What we do find is, just to come back to the whole point of carrying devices back and forward, we find a lot of companies will leverage off thin clients, so that they'll have a thin client in the office, and then the people don't have to carry their laptops in and out. It enables them to be able to log on to their environment. They can log on to their environment, whether they're in the office going into their way, or they can log on, and somebody else can use that desk and log on to their own desk with their own credentials. So we do find that for multinational organisations, a lot of that has been looked at, rather than going back and forward with the devices.
Okay. Don, we talked a bit earlier there, some of the businesses talked about rising costs, they talked about inflation. Inflation is funny because if it's running at 8 or 9% and somebody says, don't worry, it won't last, they don't mean that when it's over, prices are going to fall. What they mean is it's not going to rise at that rate, and the price rises are there, and they're sort of embedded in the system. Where do you see that going, and how big what's the time frame on that, do you think?
Yeah, well, there's also another risk as well to add to the inflation, just to throw another one out there. If we had an outright block on Russian gas at the moment, you'd add another 3% to this year's inflation projections, and maybe another 1 percentage points to next year. So Hungary's blocking that at the moment. So there's pros and cons to that. Clearly, we're all against the Russia-Ukrainian situation and the war that's happening there. But that would be a big negative, clearly, on inflation. But it will come back, but it might come back to like half the level of maybe, or perhaps in Ireland, under 3% next year is maybe the forecast that we're looking at. But as you say, it's not a reduction, it's still a growing amount. So it's the rate of growth is starting to fall back a bit. And that the natural force through, as the interest rate kick in, like the ECB is meeting today, there'll be a 25 basis points at least increase in July, probably 50 basis points by the end of September, and going to 125 or maybe higher by the end of next year. The big debate is how quickly they'll accelerate those changes and how quickly they'll turn off the tap of buying government bonds. And all of those eventually will have they will contract economies and eventually lead to a tapering off in inflation. So it is a balancing act, but we will see that continued pressure. The one point, though, on the multinational side, all of the large multinational tech companies have now put in hiring freezes, most of them. So that pressure that lots of indigenous companies were feeling when you were hiring junior staff and you were offering someone 40 grand and Google came along and offered them 65, and you just can't compete with that. And that kind of rippled up as you went up the ranks in terms of experience levels. So as they put hiring freezes in their own organizations, that should at least reduce the heat on the battle for talent, which has been a big challenge, not only for the high growth companies, but right across the sector.
And we were talking there, Denise, about multinationals, and you were talking about, opportunities and changing landscape. One of the things that is talked about now, and it's seen as a longer term risk or uncertainty, is, are we coming to the end of this period of globalization and the benefits of globalization over the last 20, 30 years? Some big heavy hitters on Wall Street think we are. Ireland has benefited enormously from that, but might there be some opportunities if companies rethink about bringing manufacturing and what gets made or where they supply it closer to home or to particular jurisdictions or places that they see as being politically stable?
Yeah, like it's a big issue. It is about controlling supply. So what can you control in your company? You can control cash spend, but you're trying to control and have dependable supply. So relying on Asian, which was cheap labor, cheap inputs, but their labor costs have increased, shipping costs have exploded in terms of container costs. We've seen it with clients where lead times on products were typically coming from Asia were 7 to 8 weeks had doubled, so that was really impacting. We're working with a German family-owned business at the moment, which is acquiring companies in the UK. They're applying manufacturing capability in the UK, and that's a a positive Brexit effect, let's put it that way, but that can be replicated in Ireland and other markets where they need to have local production. They had local sales capability, but they need local production. So Ireland can, to use the GE example earlier, so there'll always be some positives that you see. So when we came out of the pandemic, we had a big spend in e-commerce. So all the e-commerce companies were having a big push, and they were seeing that benefit, and that pushed early into this year. And then that tapered off, and then the travel sector is seeing the benefit. So we've had companies that are one company called Hubly, which are organized. It's all set up around remote working, allowing companies to book small meeting room spaces and maybe associate accommodation. And they've seen a significant increase in activity levels in their market. So there are always some positive aspects to the changes and where the money flows.
And Denise, just to that point about bigger companies and hiring, and if they're doing a hiring freeze, maybe it makes things easier for other companies. What are the challenges for you around hiring staff, keeping staff, and how important is it to look after staff as part of the culture of the organisation?
I suppose we were talking earlier, and I was saying about 5 years ago, we made a really conscious effort at Enterprise Solutions to hire the right people. As in, you're inclined in a technology company to go for the most technically sound people, so we were drilling that, and then we were finding we're just not able to deliver the service we wanted. We're all about, we can do it the best, we can do it, and I'm saying, we're actually not. And we took a really stance back and said, look, what do we need to change here? And it really was about the people. So we couldn't just hire for their expertise, and really we could train. So if we could hire the right kind of candidates with the right attitude, then we could train them. And therefore we were able to deliver the service that we wanted to. And that's really come to fruition. So for over the last 5 years, we've made definite hiring thing. We talk about our core values. We circle everything back into our core values. When people at the interview status, they're spoken, these are ours, do yours align? Can you see this working? And
so the CV, it's almost how you look at the CV. The CV is less important, or is only one step in the process instead of being most of the process?
Yeah, it's one step. It used to be all the process. Gosh, you have all these exams and that's what I need. You've got the job. Now it is one step. And when they come, we very much say, you're great. You're ticking loads of boxes. Technically, you're not where we need you to be. And you'll have a really, tight time scale for the next year to get you technically where you need to go. So for you to get there, or you want A, we'll pay you C. And when you get to A, we'll give you that. And we found that it's worked well. It has, but I have been a victim of that huge resignation. We had like 10 people leave at the other side of COVID. So like we were 33, and then we're out the other side. You've paid them all. You've done everything. I got lovely letters telling me how nice we are, what a great company we are, and all the rest, but we're going to Google, we're going to Microsoft, we're going. So that's hard to weather, but we had kind of had that demographic of 22 to 32, and once one again, it was like a ripple effect because they're looking for the social aspect, and then with people at home, it didn't all.
They're at a different life stage, so therefore they have a different plan.
And I do think for hybrid working, that's another huge factor. It depends what life stage you are at.
So would you say mix the ages of hiring?
Absolutely.
The better the mix.
Well, I think we had specifically gone for this demographic to try and just get a bit of energy and get that enthusiasm going. So it was mainly like marketing, sales, so not actually the technical, the soft pieces around the company to drive it. Yeah. So we haven't replaced everybody at the moment. It's certainly not like for like. It's given me food for thought just with what is coming down the road. What does the business need? And technically, we're still on that path, offering people jobs and then training that, getting them up to speed as they go along.
Be open to those a little bit older. There's hope for me. Yeah. Just one final question then to you, Dawn. I'm not. It's unfair in the current environment, particularly, to ask you to do a kind of a crystal ball. Where we're going to be a year from now. But where will we be a year from now? Let's assume. I'm going to make this easier for you. Let's assume things go along the lines of maybe what's forecasted or what you see forecasts doing. Let's assume that happens. What does that look like this time next year for Irish business, do you think?
Well, I think there'll still be a a discovery phase of, for certain companies, how much price pressure you can pass on to consumers, and we're seeing that from an investor point of view as they look at companies. So lots of money still out there for companies that want to invest and grow, but those who can kind of discover that and test that price elasticity of demand, like what will people, how much can a consumer bear, and which sectors will do better. So I think retail and hospitality, clearly they're going to feel the impact of that, and to get that sharing right. But I think the economy will still have a relatively strong economy. I think the growth will start to temper off. It's just natural because we have those inflationary impacts. We have those reduced availability of capital to governments to spend. But there will be, infrastructure projects that will come from whether it's clean technology and alternative and renewable energy sources, and from those supply chain decisions that people will make. So, like, the one big thing we see with chairmen and CEOs and CFOs 2 years ago, that the whole concept around ESG and how it impacts, supply chain and everything else, how we do what we do, was a bit more nebulous. Now it's in the analytical planning phase. How do we measure? How do we do that? And then it'll be about actioning. How do we invest to deliver on that? So I think there's going to be a period of investment which will benefit the economy, but we will have tempered growth as a result of the macro environment.
Okay, thank you very much to Don, and thank you very much, Denise. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Okay.
And on that note, I'm going to wrap it up. I think the story from today is that, there are a lot of fantastic businesses doing great things. There are challenges and uncertainties out there and risks, but I think ideas will win out, people will win out, collaboration and partnership will win out. And if you can hold on to some of the lessons that you've learned from the last couple of years in your business into the future, things may well prove to be very fruitful for you despite all of the uncertainty. Thank you very much, guys.